All right. Well, I think I'll get started. Welcome, everybody. I know everybody's probably getting together with their families and hopefully doing so safely and trying to enjoy the holiday. So,
Baking pies.
uh, yeah, making pies. And our best wishes to everybody and a happy Thanksgiving tomorrow. Uh, I don't have a ton this evening. Like we were saying, the news around drones and UAS right now is pretty slow. We are currently on a waiting pattern to see when the remote ID rules drop. And once that happens, we will go through the same cycle that we went through with the NPRM, where we pull it, we review it, we break it down for the general public because reading regulations is definitely no fun. And when we can break it down into an easier to read format and condense it from before the NPRM was like 219 pages into maybe 3 or 4 pages. I think we even broke down the NPRM into like a one pager. It makes it a whole lot easier to digest and figure out what's going on.
And I
So
can't imagine that the final ruling will have fewer pages than the proposal.
yeah, well, hopefully they took some stuff out. That would be great.
Although technically,
So
don't they have to fill it with all kinds of justifications and answers to some of the comments?
yeah, I I think so. Dave, you would probably know better on that than I would.
I believe they do.
Okay.
Yeah, the front matter will be in some level of response to the 53,000 comments.
Yeah.
That could be a
So
couple pages.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean it would be nice to read those and see, what their thoughts were on all of what the community and the industry kind of gave them for feedback on that. So
Yeah, it'll be, hey, FPVFC, thanks for the comments, but we're going a different direction.
right, right. Like ASTM. So, funny story about ASTM, and I'm gonna kind of segue real quick into the ASTM standard. Let me see. Um, so let me drop this real quick. It wasn't this article, but whoa. Oh, hey. It would help if I did it the proper way. Okay, so the FAA and NASA have completed their phase 2 demonstrations for UTM. And in this project, all the different participants were using the ASTM standard. Let me see if I can find that article real quick where it talks about that. Hold on one sec. And excuse me, I'm sorry. Um, where'd it go? Where'd it go? There we go. And the different companies had to basically use the ASTM standard for essentially remote ID, so that they could be tracked by the UTM, and they had to figure out the ways of utilizing that and making it all work with the UTM. So the funny thing is they want to steer away from the ASTM standard, but yet they're utilizing it for their UTM pilot program. So, and let me drop this link in real quick. So it kind of makes it a little weird. So in this second article that I popped in there from SUIS News, um, it says the ASTM standards provided a viable framework for UTM service providers to communicate with one another. Remote identification, conformance monitoring, and strategic deconfliction and other functions that ASTM specifies demonstrated the feasibility of the CONOPS. All of the work behind the ASTM standards enabled OneSky to operate within or with other USSs to give pilots the enhanced situational awareness they need to safely fly in busy environments. So, I mean, it's like we're operating it successfully over here on the left hand, yet we're rejecting it as a method of remote identification on the right hand. So, I don't quite understand the I mean, in the NPRM, they just basically said we're not going to be utilizing the ASTM standard,
Right.
and there
Or
was no
or
justification behind it.
or input from ashore, or the arc, or the input from the deck.
Right.
Which
So
I think they're going to have to walk some of that back, particularly because they've described that the future of the FAA is a reference-based rulemaking, and so
correct.
looking to organizations like ICAO and ASTM and other standards, formation bodies, are what they're going to do.
Right. So for those who don't know, the UTM Pilot Program, it was basically centered around the airport in Rome, New York. And they were basically conducting UAS operations right around there, and anywhere from 1 to 15 different UASs up in the air at the same time over a relatively busy airspace. And that was basically what the program was, what the tests behind it were, is being able to conduct operations in a high density area for air traffic. So um, pretty interesting that they wrap that up. Interesting that they are using ASTM. But it'll be it'll be good in one form as they kind of develop the UTM. Everybody kind of walked away from the test saying that UTM was fairly successful and is growing into a mature kind of system. So that was
Did,
pretty interesting.
did this article go into the new program, the IPP replacement called Beyond?
I think so. I think it's going to be kind of rolled it up into that.
Uh-huh.
Um, but it didn't like touch I, this article that I'm reading did not touch base on Beyond in here.
Okay.
It was more just the takeaways from that particular project.
Okay.
So the biggest issue actually during this project was GPS accuracy. um, so while the actual unit or the UAV was within like the bounding box of their project, the GPS positions sometimes had anywhere from a 5 to 45 meter accuracy issue, which often placed the UAS digitally outside of its basically area of operation, whereas technically, in all actuality, it was within its area. So one of the call outs in this was that GPS accuracy, and making sure that the GPS receivers are basically higher caliber units to you know maintain that accuracy. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. But that was one of the big key takeaways.
Yeah, as
Uh,
anybody who's used GPS knows, there's a lot of things that can interfere with it and cause it to be less than accurate.
Absolutely. I mean, I know, like going into a building with a metal roof, like your accuracy goes way down. Like even just on your phone, or the number of satellites you're connected to, or
Tree
if
cover,
you're
valleys, yeah, magnetic
yeah. So
interference.
absolutely. So the more satellites you can connect to, the more constellations, I guess is the
Yeah.
proper term, the more accurate it's going to be, because it's taking that data from multiple positions. Um, so uh, yeah, kind of interesting. I also have this, and this actually came down as an email from the FAA that we were kind of passing around internally. But the FAA did publish some UAS airworthiness criteria, and these are focused on 10 different companies who are uh, basically putting forward uh, aircraft UAS for certification. And I haven't done a huge amount of digging on this. Dave, you probably can speak a little better to this, but I did do reading on some of the air of these UASs, and man, it's very detailed, the information that they're looking for.
Yeah, I read a couple of them, and they do appear that they did a copy and paste largely, which is good. So that and it's also and Alex brought up the point on gosh, there's no reference to remote ID in any of this, and I think that's correct. And I thought, oh well, maybe Part 135 and Part 91, transport and cargo, are covered by the remote ID. That's what I've been looking at, and I'm not sure. So I need to dig into Part 135 and Part 91 to answer that, but it's more of an esoteric question for us to see if enterprises, doing things like transport or cargo, or do get a buy, or I doubt they're going to get a buy when you look at the airworthiness requirements. This looks like
Right.
full-fledged aircraft, logs, manuals, meticulous design that you have to get approved by the FAA. So all the things that we don't like about the manufacturing aspects in the remote ID rules certainly are in place for each of these providers. But these are big companies flying big drones for long distances beyond visual line of sight. So we should rightly expect that the any and all technology and regulations would be applicable.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's even just some interesting ones. Basically being able to prove that the UAS can take a lightning strike and still fly.
Yikes.
I mean, like, that
Yeah.
blew me away. I was like,
Right.
"Whoa!"
Yeah.
and then it's like, well, if it can't, then you have to put it into the flight manual that you cannot fly this in adverse weather conditions. And I was just like, really, who's going to be? I mean, really? I wouldn't put my drone up when I wouldn't be standing outside. I mean,
I probably would.
yeah, well, yeah.
Actually,
It's
I
like-
probably have.
Dan, Dan is looking.
That's
Yeah, Dan is
awesome.
looking forward to that tornado flight.
Yeah.
He's got the sacrificial drone all lined up.
Even
It's
if even if the vehicle could take the hit, the pilot can't. Like it's right?
just like, well, we have to certify the pilot. Well, pilot just dropped dead, so we don't know what the drone's doing.
Well, if you're flying in
No,
your car, you should be fine, right?
That's right.
Well,
Just
I mean,
don't-
I
just
think
don't-
in the case of
don't touch any metal.
in the case of these airworthiness certifications, these are going to be largely autonomous, right?
Yeah,
So
they'll be flying far away from any operator.
yeah, so like the zipline drones, they launch those and they fly to their destination autonomously, and then they come back and they catch them in a net. So a good chunk of these obviously would not be under that thing, but within these airworthiness criteria would be the ability to dynamically retake control, over the aircraft in case of an emergency or something like that. So pretty interesting. This is just one of the airworthiness criteria. This is for, I think, 3D robotics. Yeah. But there's if you get the FAA emails, which I highly recommend because they're usually fairly informational, if not short and just a link pit. But at the same time, it's good to know that they're publishing this stuff and sending it out to everybody who signs up for that, and it's free. So there's that too. Let's see.
Hey, Kojo.
Yeah.
Hey, just got a quick comment for you guys. So as you guys know from a couple weeks ago, I work a lot of the defense, department DoD type stuff, and
Right.
a lot of the projects that we're doing, or not a lot, I would say some of the projects that are coming up require us to go to over 55 pounds.
Right.
And that also falls into, requiring to get a special airworthiness certificate. Because we're a civil operator, so there's this. It goes into the weeds, but civil operator versus public operator. So most people are civil operators, and you have to go through a special airworthiness certificate, which is that long process working with the FAA on, hey, how do I prove to you FAA that my UAS is airworthy, which is, hey, I need to submit this, that, all the things you mentioned, all the things that these companies have to go through, like Amazon. I saw the email, and I went through the Amazon one a little bit,
Yeah.
and it's the same kind of stuff, right? And with to submit, all the designs, electrical, mechanical. We've had to do some of the projects have to go through that process. I think we've only had 2 projects. One wasn't all the way successful in getting their special airworthiness certificate because of COVID, but one is on their way to getting it now. And like you said, you have to get an inspector to come out after you submit all that paperwork, and they're good with that. Inspector has to come out and visually inspect it, and then he gives you the stamp, the stamp
Oh,
of
wow.
approval. And then you have to get a COA on top of that. A COA is a little easier to get.
Right.
It doesn't take as long, but usually, my experience, we've gotten the COA first, and then as we're submitting we're submitting all the paperwork on top of that. I'm just waiting for the guy to come out and basically. But that whole process has taken about a year,
Good
right?
grief.
Yeah. So that's I always highly advise my projects within the company to say, okay, if you unless if you need this UAS to be flying for a long period of time, for years, in a few years span, and then go through that rigorous process. If not, then go through a public operator. And
Right.
what's the definition of a public operator? It took me forever to try to figure this one out, and I probably don't understand 100%. But really, it's a letter that an organization can get that says, from the federal government, that says you're a public operator, and there's some rules and limitations for that.
Okay.
Government institutions are also considered, I think, public operators. So sometimes, like, if you want to go the route of, hey, you have a sponsor, which is let's say the Navy in this case, they would have to write a letter to our organization saying, hey, they are a public operator on our behalf, or something like that. They could go that route. Not always is the case. I mean, there's I'm getting into the weeds now, but there are already public operators out there, such as in the Maryland area. That's where I live, and it's called University of Maryland UAS Test Site, is what its name is. It falls under the university, but they're located somewhere else. Anyway, so within Maryland, and they're an organization that deals with. So apparently they can take a project on and say, okay, we're going to do our own. The FAA entrusts them as a public operator to do their own independent airworthiness study or evaluation, excuse me. And what happens is that you basically give them whatever paperwork instead of the FAA, and it's a lot. You get responses a lot faster. It's a lot easier, and within a month, you can, if you give them all the paperwork, within a month, you can get your special. They'll submit on their behalf, because they're flying under their status, their public operator status. On their behalf, they'll submit it to the FAA, and the FAA is pretty quick, very quick, to turn that around and approve it for a special airworthiness certificate. Essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, that seems like a lot like the FAA has kind of, certified them to certify, aircraft for airworthiness, and then, if it goes through them, it just gets expedited, essentially, because the FAA is like, well, you went through the process that we already certified you for, so
yeah,
we'll go ahead and sign off on this, which makes sense.
And they have a trusted relationship with them, obviously, with the FAA, because they've these companies have, or this organization has been doing this for a little while with the FAA, so they have all the process, laying flat and quick. So, and then they also file for a COA for you, and then you fly under them. And the only caveat to this is that you have to they have an aviation safety officer, is what they call it, and you have to pay for that aviation safety officer to be there if you want to fly under their COA. Plus, technically, just one last thing is, you're technically also, because you're flying under their public operator status, you have to like lease the aircraft to them for like a penny or whatever, something like
Oh, so
yeah,
it's under
something like
their on
yeah,
their
just so it's
books.
under them, and it's like a certain amount of time. I think it's like 90 days or something like that. They're pretty easy about it. They're like, yeah, you know, you can, you know, we don't have to have the aircraft in hand. You guys can hold it. I mean, you guys can fly the whole thing. Like, it's just like a paperwork thing,
They're
just to make
holding the
sure.
deed essentially, or
Yeah,
the lease
exactly,
to it. Yeah,
exactly,
which
exactly.
makes sense.
So that's like the whole
Definitely interesting.
process. And yet, I mean, you're paying them for this, but they're relatively cheap when it comes to DoD type products. It's relatively cheap within, you know, I think it's like they've quoted me like, I don't know, 3,000, depending on how difficult your project is, about 3,000 for the airworthiness study, and then COA is a lot less than that for
Yeah,
them to actually establish that. And but when we're talking DoD dollar project, it's like chump change, right? It's like
right, of
pocket
course.
money, yeah.
Which is
So,
great to have that resource available if you're developing a commercial product or something like that.
yep.
Or you're looking to test a large scale, something or other.
Exactly.
Definitely great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the information. I appreciate that.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. So coming up next, I think we did mention Amazon, and you were looking at Amazon. So Amazon has done some layoffs and reorganization of their Prime Air organization, and they are kind of lowering the headcount. It seems like, and that might be a little bit around COVID, but they say they are still committed to the Prime Air project. So definitely interesting that they just got certified by the FAA for their was it beyond visual line of sight, I think, Dave, and then all of a sudden they lower the headcount there. So pretty interesting that's going on there.
They must have needed
Yeah.
all those people to get the certification from the FAA.
Right.
Now they got that. Now they're gone.
Yeah. So Amazon, not a friend of recreational UAS.
No.
Google, significant friend to recreational, and
Yes.
Google Wing has released a new piece of software that we can download and play with. It's called Sky Grid. It looks like it's their first blush at a UTM. I haven't looked at it to see if it also incorporates a lands capability. Would not surprise me. And the Google CEO is leading the current tasking group under the DAC on the low altitude work.
Mm-hmm.
What was that?
Infuriate or
Was that
I
an
think he's
Apple?
saying infiltrate. There, he changed it.
I'm sorry. Say
Yep,
again?
that's it.
What was that app called?
Sky Grid. SKYGRID.
Red J just posted a link to it there.
Yeah, is that the right one, Dave?
Yes.
It sure is.
Nice, nice.
Yeah,
All right.
These are some good folks, and many of the people in Wing are also UAS operators. So yes.
Okay, Kojo, you mentioned beyond visual line of sight. I just had a question about that.
Yeah.
For like Amazon, how are, or just in general, I guess, how do they? I haven't read it all the way through, like the paper that they showed us, but how are they solving the issue of, let's say they go beyond visual line of sight, they're delivering a package, a few miles away.
Mm-hmm.
How are they? A couple questions, I guess. How are they maintaining command and control link?
So I would imagine you've got one of two extremely viable options. One would be over basically cell service, where they can utilize that. Now, the problem with that later on down the road, if, for some reason, I mean, I'm of the belief that drone delivery is going to be a very finite thing. It's going to be very situational, and it's not going to be, as proliferate as a lot of people seem to think it's going to be. But at the same time, if you start scaling up those operations to massive amounts, you start inundating the signal, the cell signal capability of the towers. So if you don't, if you don't know, cell towers obviously can only handle a certain amount of traffic per tower before they start to basically deny service. And this is heavily evidenced in like natural disasters, like if there's an earthquake or a hurricane and everybody's trying to contact their loved ones and whatnot, and the entire system just gets locked up. So that's one way.
And-
The other way
well-
would be, oh, go ahead, Dave.
You also specifically, each of these companies have to go through a process, just like Elias was referencing a little earlier, and so they have to describe the risk that their mission and their set of missions will incorporate, and then how are they mitigating any of those risks. And command and control constant contact is one of them, as well as what's the disaster, how do they handle crashes,
signal, yeah.
etc. And so ground stations are absolutely part of the story in a lot of these. And so they have to have ground radar, or it's multiple stations beaming repeated signals up to, or it's different types of signals, or it's LiDAR, or it's satellite communications.
Yeah,
So
that would be my next one.
a
Would
whole,
be
a
satellite.
whole list of a variety of technologies.
And as
And
Josh was saying, the cell phone providers are definitely positioning themselves to be the companies behind making this all
The
work.
carriers, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Big
mean,
carriers.
yeah,
Yes,
Verizon
big
and
time.
AT&T and and T-Mobile and all these companies are, very involved in the in
In
this
the
process,
UT
and then
in
yeah.
creating UTMs, and so they're creating software platforms that could drop in, so they can be remote. What is it, RSS or RUSS? They can be
USS, yeah.
They're
Yeah, thank you.
salivating at the idea of all these recreational drone operators needing to have cell phone connections.
right.
Yeah.
So
it
where are we at
becomes-
with this technology right now? I mean, okay, yeah. So there's cell towers, satellites, the other options. Like what has been tested? What has actually worked? Do we know anything about that?
I would imagine that most of these different solutions have been tested. In fact, I know of there's a couple of videos of even just amateur pilots, just somebody like us, using a cell phone signal to fly his DJI Parrot. Was it a Parrot DJI?
No,
It's
no.
not
It's Parrot's a different one, but yeah.
Parrot, yeah,
sorry.
Parrot's a different one, but one of the fixed wing, he flew between two islands in Hawaii,
nice.
using a cell phone signal. So, even recreational pilots have that capability. So,
And like as TechJet said, how can they have cell phone signal great between two islands in Hawaii, but it doesn't work in his backyard?
right,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So in the 50 as of late 2019, there were 50 beyond visual line of sight waivers granted, and those are all the technology used is all public record. Plus the reports from the variety of IPPs are available. I would suggest that the IPP documentation is not terribly enlightening.
Yeah.
But what will be important is I would bet that very quickly after the remote ID final rule is issued, the FAA will be issuing the beyond visual line of sight and flight over people rules, and I think that then we'll start to nail that down.
So whenever I brief Part 107, I brief a couple different emergencies, right? I mean, there's loss of command and control and loss of GPS are the two most popular, or the two
most
prevalent ones, I guess. I mean, there are other emergency scenarios I brief also, but those are the two that are just standard across any UAS, right?
right.
Well, I would suggest there's a third, which is the video.
Oh,
So-
right, yeah, video link going down. True.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which is definitely, that may not be so much the case for a commercial outfit, but for FPV and cinematography and that kind of thing, that's definitely a big issue.
It's true, absolutely. And I will say the first thing that goes out is going to be the video link, then command and control. But those things are going to be really far away. I mean, especially flying DJI. Well, I'm not talking FPV. I'm talking about like DJI. That's what I have experience with. And
Right.
and so, so I guess the last question on this topic is GPS. How are those companies dealing with? Okay, I get it. Command and control, RTH, right? Come back home.
Right.
back to a lat long where it took off from, right? And so then what about GPS? What are they? How are they planning on fighting that? If they lose GPS, is it just going to land? Because it's not. It doesn't. Ideally, I don't know.
Well,
How does it know how to get back home?
hang on. It uses as long as your compass is correctly calibrated before you take off, and then it
Yeah.
also takes a picture of the ground depending on the company. If DJIs, for example, they take a snapshot from above. So whenever you see it like flying back, and you may not like the height it flies back at, it may come back at like 100 feet above where you were,
Right.
because it needs that snapshot location to figure out where the heck it's at.
Right. And there is supposed to be a set of conditional challenges that the onboard program is going through that's determining, do I have enough battery to get home? And if it's really in dire straits, then it needs to crash with a level of kinetic energy that was articulated in the ANPRM documents early in 2019, which are ridiculous levels. So
Yeah,
essentially, it has
low.
to be one significant parachute or something of that nature that will slow it down or make a several pound drone either slow down or so it doesn't kill someone, or to reduce the speed with something else. So that it either has to glide and slow down, or it has to be stopped, like something like a parachute.
Does
And this is-
self-destruct work?
Well, probably
Just
it
break
would
up
need
into
to
little
vaporize,
pieces?
probably, right? So
It's
Yeah.
frangible tech. That's a real thing.
it
love it.
definitely is. But I mean, and this is all lined out in the AANPRM from the Flight Over People. So and like Dave was saying, the kinetic velocities, they were taken from a completely non-related study from NASA, I believe, on the kinetic energy of a part that
Vehicle.
falls off an aircraft, right? So and
Yeah.
basically a 650 gram drone would have to slow down to like 3 miles an hour for it to meet the standard. So
Right. Right.
it's pretty.
Yeah, and TextJet has a good question. What does the military use for their drones? And so there's a fair amount of publicly available documentation for companies like General Atomic. Really, some wonderfully bright engineers up there, and they use a whole series of redundancies and all different sets of technologies. And of course, they are allowed to work on different RF frequencies. So lots of different technologies in their aircraft so that they can ensure maximum uptime for their C2.
Yeah. I used to work Global Hawk, by the way, for Northrop Grumman. And
Very cool.
yeah,
Very cool.
we had both serial and what do we have? Inmarsat, KU Satcom. We had UHF Satcom. We had line of sight links. We had both. We had all kinds of. We have like 5 different links on the Global Hawk that we can connect to. Plus, I mean, we're running off mission plan, right? So and we can change. We have all these coordinates in the sky that we can go to. It does this pre-mission plan type thing, but as a pilot, we can just like we
Deviate.
we can say, hey, I want you to go to this point now, or I want you to loiter around this point, or we can do certain override commands. You can't manually fly it like a Reaper, like a Predator, like the General Atomics guys can, because that's more of an RPV versus a Global Hawk is more hands off. It's a keyboard
Autonomous,
mouse. Yeah, more keyboard mouse type flying.
Interesting.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, so back to that question, GPS. If you're 5 miles away with an Amazon drone, how does it know if you lose GPS? How does it know how to get back home? What does it do?
So I would imagine like Red Jay was kind of talking about, and again, I'm not super familiar with DJI products, but I would imagine that it uses its compass, it uses its time of flight, its direction of flight, that kind of thing to kind of compensate for the loss of GPS. Red Jay, would you kind of fill in my
yes,
blanks
We don't have
there?
to talk about DJI. It could be like anything, like custom build. How do the custom builds do it, right? How do you?
I can't speak for custom builds. Just remember, a lot of professional kits will have a DJI brain basically in there, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Uh, but
Mhm.
any DJI-based system, what they do is they use the compasses. You have to make sure it's calibrated ahead of time. A lot of people don't do that, so they rely only on the GPS. And if it fails without the compass being properly calibrated, which anybody who's flown DJI knows that happens, you have to basically have to calibrate every other flight. Um, you can have problems. But if you have the compass calibrated, it will. Since the Mavic ones, the Mavic Pros, they take a snapshot from above. So while it's flying, right before it goes, you tell it to go somewhere. It takes a snapshot from above. It uses its compass. It uses time, as Cujo said. It uses time and direction, and you will likely bite your nails if you have to use it, because it suddenly just goes up like an arbitrary amount of feet, and then it pulls back. I've had it happen 4 times now. 3 of the times were very nerve-wracking.
Oh, baby.
I've flown many hours on Mavic Pros, Mavic Minis, and a few dozen hours now on Mavic Pro 2s for work.
Very
Amazon's
cool.
not using DJI
Very
though,
cool.
right?
No, they're probably using
No,
something
they're
very
not.
proprietary. Yeah.
Custom built stuff, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, that's where you get into, and the process that they're having to go through now, which would be the aircraft certification or the airworthiness certification, would be resolving those kind of issues beforehand and providing solutions for those. So there's if you look through what you said you did, there's definitely a bunch of scenarios that they have to provide proof cases for. So but yeah, I mean, in terms of small form factor FPV style custom builds, I mean, I'm not super well versed with like iNav and the return to home features within that, but from what I do know is they're very I guess archaic when compared to something like a DJI.
Rudimentary.
Yes, thank you.
rudimentary.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and the Betaflight return to home uses GPS exclusively. So if you drop all your satellite links, you're just in trouble.
And I mean, literally, I have GPS on 0 of my drones, so
Right.
Yeah, same
it's
here.
not
So
something I utilize.
We all fly visual line of sight. We all have a visual observer, so it's really not an issue.
So
If you can, by the way, if you're speccing out a vehicle for work, don't forget another selling feature is dual GPS, dual compasses. Redundancy is useful.
of course, yeah,
Yeah,
redundancy
yeah.
is always useful.
I fly the
Right, 2 quads. So when one crashes, you use the other one.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I like the Matrice 600. I fly a lot of the Matrice 600 Pros, which have 3 GPSs on board, which is awesome.
Oh, good God.
3.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, sir. The regular Matrice 600 has 1 only, but if for an extra $1,000, you get an extra 2 GPS.
Nice. Good.
Yeah,
break.
the whole thing costs $5,000. It's about $5,000 for a 600 Pro. So
Good.
we have,
All right.
yeah, dude.
You get
I
to-
saw one crash a couple days ago. Some kid, some new Part 107 guy, was being extra macho and he landed it, but he's like every drone is different, as you guys know, to turn on, arm and disarm and the way it flies and all that. And he's relatively new. He landed it. He you have to basically hold the throttle straight down to turn it off it takes about 2 seconds to turn off. And he accidentally had his right thumb, I guess, was holding the right stick in some kind of direction, and the the Matrice just flipped over and got destroyed. So
Oof.
Oy.
yeah,
Oy.
that was not fun.
There was I was invited to attend a leadership summit of the National Press Photographers Association. Fascinating series of panel discussions. One of the things was they were talking about what the various press organizations do in terms of best practices. So they have a couple of pilots, or a handful, or a large number of pilots, and how do they manage the aircraft as well as the pilots. One of the guys was saying that they learned early on, to your point, to make sure that everyone flew their own drone, or they were assigned a drone and that became theirs. Because one guy was a gamer, and I didn't know this, But in game, I know mode 2, which is okay. My throttle and yaw is on the left stick, and pitch and roll is on the right stick.
Mm-hmm.
And well, it's apparently in gaming, or the game that he used, it was not only mode 1 but inverse. And
Yep,
so
that's pretty common.
okay,
Yeah.
so
Actually,
so
I wrote an
that's how-
article regarding just that.
there you go. So his drone was set up like that, and needless to say, when other folks in the office used his drone, it was not a good story. So interesting tips that folks who are using drones for their business. They also described a flight book, and I've got they shared the contents of what they use, and so it sounded like good common sense, as well as if you're a commercial UAS pilot, then you're going to want to have some documentation if anyone approaches you. And so,
Yep.
good, like there's a flight plan, I've got my certificates, here are my waivers, here's the manual, people
Here's
to
my-
call.
Here's
Yeah,
my maintenance
it was-
logs. Here's my battery logs. Here's my my log book for how many hours I
Right.
have. And then for me, I'm a
Right.
regular pilot, so I have to also show my regular Part 91 log book on top of that if I get inspected to make sure my
Yeah.
biannual. I have to be current in regular big airplanes and like Cessnas for me to be able to fly, because that's the route I took. But
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and to me, for recreational, no, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But for
Yeah.
even flying 107 and doing a smaller piece of work sounded sensible from a there's looking good and doing good, and this had aspects of both.
yeah, man, I have a
So-
binder for all my operations, man, and I have all of that stuff in it for every flight I go do. Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
And you have to have your
Excellent.
DC SFRA if you're in the DC area within 60 miles or whatever. A lot of people forget about that also. That they don't teach you that in Part 107 training. And every person I talk to, like, what is that? And you have to go on FAAsafety.gov and take that training also, and have that certificate ready to be able to show to an inspector.
I was not aware of that either. It's called a DC. What's the name of it?
DC SFRA, Special Flight Rules Area. You can go on
Yeah.
FAAsafety.gov, and it's a free training.
Cool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's one for New York also. If you want to fly in the New York area, you have to do that one as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who flies
All
Part
right.
107 here? Did anyone fly Part 107? Sorry, Kojo.
No, you're fine.
There probably are.
Am I the only one?
Yep.
Or okay.
No,
Fly
you're not.
Part 107, but you knew that probably.
Yeah, Alex. Yeah, me and Alex. That's right.
Yeah, and we encourage it because, of course, you can fly recreational for. There you go, TextJet, another 107. Yeah, we feel it's a prudent thing to go do. Makes you more aware, makes you a little understand what's going on a little more, and it helps
Gives you
us
more
because-
options.
Yes, and more options, and it in the work we're doing, it allows us to explain and provide context. So let's see. So I think of the five of us, let's see, two of the five have our 107, and the three of us are delinquent and definitely want to get our one. I'm one of the ones who does not have their
Yeah,
107.
so am I. Let's see. All right. So I want to. Wow. We've been at this for a minute. I do want to get to this last article here. This is actually from Brendan Schulman. For those who don't know, he works for DJI. A very intelligent guy. This is an excellent article.
I
This
agree.
came
Well
out,
worth the read.
Yeah, it definitely was.
Yeah.
A couple of key things that I do want to call out is the amount of data that they're coming through. So I'll just read a little subset of this. But when you fly a DJI drone using the DJI Go or DJI Go 4 flight control apps, you have full control over your flight log and image data. And there's a link there. If you don't know, there's been some kind of issues, not issues. People have
Concerns.
issues with what DJI does with the data, and there was an article that I went over a couple weeks ago over what actually happens with that data and whatnot. But at any rate, but also you have the option to anonymously share basic user experience data with us so we can understand how our customers use our products and how we can improve them, similar to what many tech companies do. Only about 35% of our users choose to do that, but that's enough to draw some conclusion. In the United States in 2019, the users who chose to share data with us conducted 9,632,454 flights, averaging 7.1 minutes each. So that's only 35% of their users. Extrapolating from that 35% to our entire user base on DJI Go and DJI Go 4, we estimate they flew 27.5 million flights. But that's not all. We conservatively estimated about 15% of DJI drone pilots use other flight control apps like DJI Fly, DJI Pilot, DJI Flight Hub, or software from our development kit partners such as Drone Deploy and Measure. Adjusting for that factor, we estimate DJI drones flew 31.6 million flights just in the United States last year. Plenty of people fly drones from other manufacturers. The FAA says DJI products comprise only 36% of America's drone fleet. Taking that into account implies there were 87.8 million drone flights in the US in 2019. If each of those flights averaged 7.1 minutes, like the DJI user experience data showed, that's a combined 10.3 million hours of drone flight. That's insane.
Yeah,
And
that's a lot.
The reason that he is extrapolating all this data is that, and this is just from his data. The FAA actually says that their estimates is that recreational pilots by themselves. This does not account any commercial pilots, any independent contractors, anything like that. News organizations, film industry people, just recreational pilots flew 18 million hours per year. And in all of that, we have not had a single fatality in terms of drones ever. And the point that he's kind of extrapolating from all of this is that flying a drone is one of the safest things you could possibly do in terms of aircraft. And the reason that this is important, and this is something that Dave keeps bringing up, and with good reason, is that the FAA and any kind of regulations that come out of the FAA need to be cognizant of the actual risk involved in the activity. And it basically needs to be regulation by, level of risk. And in our case, safest form of aviation seems to be getting the most, with the exception of, manned aircraft itself, the most regulation. So it's definitely a point that Brendan really kind of drives home with his data, and definitely a good read for the rest of the article. I definitely did want to pull out some of those numbers there. It's a great article.
Yeah, and that pretty much also proves that the lower limit of 250 grams is sort of too low. I have the 2015 document where they kind of go over why they chose the 250 gram limit. And it basically says that at that limit, there would be approximately less than one ground fatality for every 20 million flight hours of SUAS. And we're saying there's at least 10 million or so every year of
in
flight
between
hours.
10 and 18 million hours per year.
And there's been none.
Yeah.
So
Right. This argument, tape measures on job sites higher than one floor should be heavily regulated.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they could potentially fall once every 20 million hours or something.
That's right.
Yeah,
My brother-in-law's a
Well, you got hard
general
hats.
contractor. He'd sign up for that in a minute.
Right.
Not. Yeah. To state the obvious, DJI is also a great supporter of recreational as well as commercial UAS, but they are involved in industry associations, in working with Congress, working with the FAA. So they're busy, they're active, and they are really good supporters of recreational.
Absolutely. I guess the fun part about this is that we're we're an organization based on trying to impact these regulations as best as possible. And when people like DJI provide the evidence that we can bring, and that they themselves are obviously bringing, it can definitely make an impact. So, in fact, I think in our remote ID response, we submitted that we raised the minimum threshold to a kilogram.
Right. Right.
So instead of that 200 arbitrary 250 grams. But at any rate, I did want to share that because it was a great article. Brendan always puts out really great articles with really great data. If you're ever somebody asks how safe drones are, or tells you that they're dangerous, it gives you a great path to direct them to this data and you know kind of mitigate some of that. So at any rate, Dave, you have
I
anything else for us?
do. I had two things I wanted to add. First is that we've welcomed Alex Suarez onto FPVFC. As you heard a couple of us reference 5 of us as opposed to 4 of us. And so welcome to Alex. Alex, for those of you who don't know him, is a young man. And I was thinking about this and realized, oh my goodness, I'm not old enough to be Alex's father. I'm old enough to be his grandfather. So that's that's important from the perspective of the gray hairs and the 40 years of working in corporate business is good when I go talk to the FAA. When we want to attract young people and we're trying to understand, the relevance of what is it that we're working on? What does it have? How relevant is it to kids? Alex is a lot closer to that, and yet in his very brief period on the earth, he's done a lot of things. He is a Part 107 certified, as we were talking about. He's also got into drones recently, comparatively, and is already ranked 94th in multi GP. He is also a freshman in engineering at the in electrical engineering at the York College of Pennsylvania, and as a mechanical engineer myself, any young person getting into engineering is wonderful. And Alex has a complete pass to skip anything FPVFC related if his engineering schooling deems that. So that's critically important, and we're tremendously proud that he is an engineering student. And one of the ways that we met Alex was that he works for the Global Air Drone Academy, and this is a wonderful not-for-profit organization that is working with kids. And Josh and I had the pleasure of presenting to this organization, thanks to Alex, back in the summer. And the age group was 8 years old to 14. So these kids are wonderful, and it was that organization that you saw a couple of weeks ago that was got a Q&A session with Administrator Dixon of the FAA. So
yep, and that was Caden was one of those that asked that question about remote ID of the administrator.
He sure was, yeah, an 11-year-old down at Nationals as well. And so, Alex, welcome. And Alex will be focused as our youth advocate. And the way we divvy up the work is that we all try to do. There are only 5 of us, and so we all do bits of work, but we all have our specializations as well. That was one, and the other is I just wanted to wish everyone a good Thanksgiving, happy, healthy, and please stay safe and enjoy the day tomorrow.
Welcome to the team, Alex, and we'll have your bio on the website shortly.
Absolutely. I do also want to thank Get FPV yesterday. It's a company that I've worked for, but they have done some. They've reached out to us and endorsed the FPVFC. They have links on their website that go to ours. And Dave and I, if you haven't seen it, I think Dan posted it yesterday as it was ongoing. Dave and I did a kind of interview with Big Russ over there regarding remote ID and kind of the factors that could be an issue in the upcoming rule. So if you haven't had a chance to check that out, feel free to check that out. But the guys over at Get FPV are great, and we really appreciate them stepping up to kind of help us get the word out.
Yeah, they're encouraging folks to become members of FPVFC. They're getting the word out not only on their webpage but out to their suppliers. So we're really grateful for their support. And if you haven't seen it, we've also got Rotor Riot is doing a similar thing, and this is an endorsement, which effectively says that they support what it is that we're doing, and it's a non-contractual partnership.
So definitely want to appreciate them. So, and with that, Dan, you got anything for us?
I don't think I have anything new. No.
And anybody else? Any questions, comments, or anything like that before we wrap up and let you all go and spend time with your family for the next couple of days?
Wow, right at 9 o'clock even. Or 9
I
o'clock my
know.
time, 10 o'clock Eastern.
Here's one article I wanted to put in. It's right there.
Oh, I'm
I put
sorry,
it in last meeting afterwards because it came out like the day before. But this just goes over some things about how the FAA needs to address competency training gaps.
Yep.
Specifically with UAS. So anyone's interested, take a look at that.
Yeah.
Also, go ahead.
This is interesting from a perspective of get a job with the FAA. You know, there are some great people who work for the FAA and work in the UAS office, and so it's you might cringe, but it's the work is interesting, and there are some great people there.
And like TechJet says, that article specifically calls out the FAA's need for competency for when it comes to UAS.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely. And we would agree. I do also want to just give a quick reminder. If any of you originally registered as a recreational pilot with the FAA when the rule first came out, like a long time ago, your registration's probably going to come up soon. I personally got an email that mine's due in the next 30 days. It's $5. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I got that email
on the
last week
of
as
December.
well.
Yeah, so I got it immediately, and so I know a lot of people's registration is coming up. So there, when the rule got challenged, and they kind of put it on standby until they released the FAA reauthorization. Was it the FAA? Yeah, I think it was the FAA reauthorization where they it was a DoD thing, where they actually put it back in. Everybody kind of got a free year, I think. Essentially.
And then I think they extended it this year for COVID stuff.
They did. So it's definitely coming due for a lot of people. So don't forget that, just in case something happens.
As a reminder, that registration is you're registering yourself, the operator, not the drones, and so you put the same number on the outside of the drone, different from a Part 107 where you have to register each aircraft.
And please, 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 please go to the actual FAA website, the Drone Zone, to do so. There are other companies out there who are charging triple the rate at $15. Yeah. So you please be careful of that. Go to the right website to do that. You don't want to give your information out to a bunch of randos. So
one more thing. What was the change to the markings? Sorry.
The only change in the markings were that it has to be on the outside of the aircraft. It used to be that it could be on the inside, like in a battery bay. And it has to be in a place that whoever is inspecting that is not in danger of the drone harming them in any way. So you want to keep it away from the propellers.
And one other thing about the registration is something we got from the FAA safety team is only 3.4% of pilots have re-registered so far, which is only about 30,000.
Yeah,
so keep that in mind. Because
a lot of people don't want to be registered.
Yes. So
yeah, and as TechJet says, there's also a little identification card with your FAA registration number. That is one of the things that would go in your binder.
Yep. And I do keep a digital version of it on my phone, so I can just pull it up on my phone. But
along with your FPVFC safety guidelines.
Yes, absolutely.
There you go.
I can definitely see why some people don't want to be registered, but in my opinion, I think it seems like the FAA uses that registration data to say, hey, I mean, there's not that many recreational people, so we can ignore them. So the more of us that do register, the better. But I don't know.
It makes sense. I mean, your point definitely makes sense, Dan, because we definitely want to be seen as active and out there. $5 isn't going to kill anybody, but I do understand. Some people don't want to, so I'm not gonna force you to do anything. But I just wanted everybody to be aware that if you did it when it first came out, you're probably due soon. So. At any rate, I know I went 5 minutes over, but I feel like it was worth it. It is good for 3 years, yes. But on that note, I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and please be safe and eat lots of great things. And yeah, so
And
have a
catch you
great
guys
night,
again in 2 more weeks.
Yep,
Very
2 more
good.
weeks.
Take care, everyone.
Take
Be
care.
safe.